Welcome to the Actually I Can Female Entrepreneur podcast. I am your host, Kayleigh Greenacre, a business strategist, coach, TEDx speaker, author, and your go-to woman for all things business strategy. I am obsessed with supporting female entrepreneurs to grow unstoppable six and multi-six-figure businesses that they love, giving them the freedom and life that they desire. During this podcast, I'll be sharing with you everything that you need to become a successful female entrepreneur, from the mindset shifts to sales and marketing strategies, and how to become an iconic leader that people can't get enough of. It is my mission to help you stand out, attract your dream clients and customers, and sell out of your offers with ease whilst building the business and life of your dreams. Let's make this your reality, ladies. Hello, ladies, and welcome to another episode of Actually I Can, the Female Entrepreneur Podcast. And I'm joined today by the fabulous Shelley Bradley-Scholey, who is a trauma expert and business owner. And we are going to be diving into the power of taking action as female entrepreneurs. Shelley, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And I'm really excited to be diving into today's topic and our episode where we are talking all things action. Before we do that, I would love for you to give a little bit more of an introduction to our listeners about yourself and your own story and your journey.
Yeah. So I guess my journey started probably 20 years ago. I started a career working in mental health as a nurse. And that career took me lots of different places, working in secure facilities, working in the armed forces, which I did for about 14 years, in the NHS and the private sector. So lots of kind of public sector organizations. I always had an ambition and a dream to have my own practice. Like as far back as I remember in my career, that was one of my goals. I used to say, oh gosh, wouldn't that be amazing? I would love that. That's my dream. And when I left the armed forces around about 4 years ago now, I started a practice as a bit of a side hustle. And that very quickly grew, and I had to make a decision really about whether I remained partly employed and partly in my practice, or whether I kind of took the plunge into it fully. And eventually it got to a point where I was so busy, I had no more hours in my week to fit things in. But the requests kept coming through my business, and they were all so exciting. All these opportunities were like really exciting things that I was desperate to do. So eventually I just took the plunge and I completely left any sort of employment and work fully now running my business.
Amazing. What a journey as well. And obviously using your expertise and your experience, and obviously then creating the business that you absolutely love today. I think that, I know we're talking about action and taking action today. And I think this is a really, really interesting topic. Would love to know a little bit more about your experience of doing this through your journey. But I think a lot of people fear and doubt taking action and doing certain things that ultimately we know are going to support us and help us move forwards as entrepreneurs. But it's that fear and that doubt that potentially stops us. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about your journey there. But is there anything particular that you can remember where whether it's messy action or just taking action, was a really crucial part to your business growth?
Yeah, I think I look back now with hindsight, and I really notice how I was kind of getting in my own way for quite some time, and having this sort of side hustle I think it was one of the ways I tested the water, because I was really quite scared about leaving what I perceived at that time as the security of being in employment, into something that was quite unknown to me. But that turned into significant amounts of procrastination.
Did it?
This kind of idea of like, it's too difficult, and what if this thing goes wrong, and what if it doesn't work out? And then somebody said to me, and it's just the most obvious thing now when I look back, somebody said to me, well, if it doesn't work out, then you can stop doing it and do something else, can't you? And that was like a real revelation.
Yeah.
I was like,
But the
what?
realization of actually they're right. Yeah.
Yeah, like no
Yeah.
decision is forever.
Yeah.
And maybe it's, maybe it is because I spent 14 years in the military where that is very much like a forever kind of career. You have to give an entire year's notice to leave that job. Um, so I'd been really used to this
Long time.
idea of kind of, it's huge, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yeah.
insane when I think about it now. I think how ridiculous. Um, but I think I'd really become accustomed to this idea that like my path was mapped out for me. It was predetermined, and I didn't really have much choice and control in that. So it was a real revelation when somebody said to me, actually, if you do something and it doesn't work out, you can just do something else. And that was a real kind of tipping point for me to say, okay, so I'll just do something. And I
Yes.
did. And that something at that point was to launch my business at that point, offering one-to-one client services, so therapy services. That was like the first big step that I took.
That's really good that you've obviously heard that from someone who you trust, and you've
Mm.
kind of looked at it from a slightly different perspective and thought, actually, okay, I can do this. I'm going to give it a go and see where it takes
Mm.
me. And I'm sure that you experienced other moments of doubt and fear along the way, especially in the beginning stages. And I think all of us have experienced these doubts and these fears. How did you overcome that? How did you overcome any doubts or fears when you were setting up your business, for example, or first starting to
Mm.
market or go live on whether it's social media or if there was another means of marketing? How did you overcome those
Yeah,
fears?
yeah. And I think, and I don't know, maybe this is a common thing. It's certainly a common thing in the sort of niche area that I work in, where people fear putting themselves out there.
Yes.
Like it's easier as an employee to be quite grey and to just hide behind the organization, whereas as an entrepreneur working in business, you yourself, who you really are, need to be out there. And I think that causes huge amounts of anxiety. We're all, I think we're all wired really to kind of long for social acceptance, aren't we? We want people to like us.
Of course, yeah.
We don't want people to say unkind things to us. Um, we want to feel that we're met with in a sort of positive light. So I
Mm.
think the reality, of course, is that that isn't always going to happen. That we're not everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. But I think overcoming this idea that everybody needs to like me, everybody needs to want to work with me, everybody needs to agree with what I put out there into the
Mm.
world. Overcoming that and recognizing that actually it's it's realistic to assume that not everybody is on board with that, and that actually that's fine because that's normal. It's not something I've done. It's
Yeah.
just the normal state of affairs in the world.
Yeah, it's not personal. That's how you have to look at it, isn't it? It's not personal.
Yeah.
It's purely that. And I think it's so interesting that you say that because again, I remember having that worry that, oh goodness, what if I upset someone, or what if someone doesn't like what I say, or what if I don't know, not my friends, but my old colleagues judge me based on what I'm putting
Mm.
out there on social media, and all of these fears and doubts and all sorts, just in terms of what people would think of me. And I look back now and I think, why was I like that? Why did I? But you
Yeah.
do, and I think these thoughts go through your mind, especially in the process of the beginning stages of your business. And it's fascinating that you say that because I do believe that a lot of people do struggle with that. But was there anything that
Mm.
really helped you push
Mm.
past that?
Mm. I think sort of being able to tune into my own inner dialogue and having insight into that was quite helpful. So really understanding like my own personal barriers.
Yes.
Um, so like we all have that sort of similar feeling. I think people will recognize a sense of maybe anxiety or worry or a feeling of uncertainty. Like we have a similar feeling, but I think what's behind that is often quite individual. So we
Yes.
do need to understand what is getting in our way. So for me, that involved, a bit of soul searching, some really helpful conversations with people around me who were already in the space that I was keen to move into, and kind of also looking at the people I really aspired to be like, so that I could get a real sense of what is it I'm trying to achieve and what is it that is getting in my way. I mean, for me, it was, old patterns really of self-criticism, which caused me to then try and be perfect. And whilst ever I was trying to achieve perfect, I was never taking any action, because perfect is impossible.
No.
So that, being able to kind of explore that. And I remember on my initial website, my early blogs were all around this kind of process that I was personally going through, where I was trying to sort of drop some of those perfectionist standards, trying to kind of keep that self-criticism in check and orientate that in the reality that was around me, so that freed me up then to begin to take some of the steps that I needed to take.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the time as well, I know we're talking about fear and doubts here, but also something that I think people experience, or female entrepreneurs experience, is overthinking. So we might have doubts and fears, and as you've just shared, thank you in terms of how you've sort of managed that moving forwards. But then also there's this concept of overthinking, and it might be at the very beginning of the journey and overthinking brand new ideas, or it might be you've been in business for 5 to 10 years, but you're overthinking a brand new concept or a brand new program or idea or offer or whatever that looks like. What strategies have helped you kind of avoid getting stuck in this kind of overthinking state? I don't know if you've ever overthought. I definitely have. And I'm sure so many of our listeners have as well to some extent. But have you? And if so, what strategies have you used to kind of make sure that you don't get stuck in that and you keep moving forwards, keep taking action?
Yeah, I'm a major overthinker. I like to try and label it as I'm an ideas person, but I'm an overthinker. you know, um, in terms of what I do, and I think I still engage in this kind of unhelpful habitual behavior. So I'm working on a couple of new projects, and I'm really in this like ideas phase, and that's where I get stuck. Like loads and loads of really cool ideas, but then converting those into something solid. Even choosing one, like, oh, got to choose the best one, got to choose the right one. What if I don't choose the correct one and this all goes horribly wrong? And so I've found I have to go through a bit of a kind of process. And when I get to the end of that process, I have to take action. So I'll start with just kind of journaling ideas. So often I'll just get random ideas. I wake up in the night, I think, oh, that'd be cool. So I kind of keep a journal of all the ideas. And then when I'm at a point where I think, right, it's time to move in a new direction, for example, setting up a mini course, which is what I'm working on now, I start to try and funnel those ideas down a little bit into something more specific, into like a few options. Sometimes I use things like, I use tools like mind maps to kind of just map out the different things. Or I'm a bit of a notebook junkie. There's probably about 6 different notebooks all around this house. But to pull it all together into one thing, then I can kind of see all the different threads of it. But once I've done that, that's my point where for me, I have to make a choice then to take action.
Yes.
So once I've got the ideas and I can see them all together, I'll look at a sort of big overview of it and I'll think, right, actually, is anybody interested in that? No, probably not. Is anybody interested in that? Yes, I get loads of questions about that all the time. I kind of trim it back. Then I've got to do something. Like I have to make a choice, because if I sit procrastinating with that for any longer, for me, that's no longer productive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sometimes it will be a really well educated choice. I've spoke to my mentor and my supervisor, and we've agreed that actually, 90% of my inquiries relate to this issue, so it makes really good sense. Other times I don't have that information. I don't know what it's going to look like, so I will literally put my finger somewhere on the mind map, and that's where I'm going to start. Just crazy and terrifying all at the same time.
But it's great to have a strategy that works for you. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's finding, everyone's different and everyone processes ideas in a different way. And I think to avoid that overthinking, absolutely having a strategy, having a way that you can, whether, if you're a visual learner, such as by the sounds of it, you are and I am, having something visually there that we can then see and we can break down is a really great thing to do. I know other people are auditory, other people are, like to make notes on their phones and do everything, whatever works for you. And I think for our listeners, finding a strategy that will work for you, especially if you feel a little bit overwhelmed, or if you overthink on certain ideas, then definitely finding a strategy, finding a tool or a way that can really support you with that to move forwards. And what would you say? I've just kind of mentioned the word overwhelm there, because I think, again, it kind of links to overthinking, but it's slightly separate. But I think overwhelm is also something that a lot of female entrepreneurs experience, especially because, normally you're on your own to start with, at least before you can build your own team. And you're doing things on your own. You're having to be your own accountant, maybe admin, social media manager, as well as the actual profession that you do, serving your clients, supporting your customers, whatever that looks like, and depending on your business. But I feel that a lot of people can become overwhelmed with the amount of work, or even with some of the goals that they set themselves. So how would you advise that people break down bigger goals or bigger tasks, into actionable steps to avoid that overwhelm?
Yeah, I find it really helpful to have like 3 levels of goals, like short, medium, long term. That helps me to so often my idea is the long term goal.
Yeah.
Like that's usually the thing that pops into my head, is this kind of end result. And then I suppose splitting that down into kind of what needs to happen in the short term to get me there, what needs to happen in the medium term to get me there, is a really helpful way for me of turning something that has 100 moving parts into more manageable chunks. Sometimes I have to go through a process of working backwards from the idea. So like the idea is the mini course, and this is what it's going to look like. But then working backwards from that to think, okay, what infrastructure do I need in place for that? What administrative functions? Like, who is it for? How am I going to reach those people? Those sorts of things. And then what can happen is each of those little goals turns into several different actionable steps. And that gives me essentially like a bit of a to-do list. And I know that I need to start at the bottom. I need to start with the short-term stuff, work my way through those, then I can move on to the next one. And maybe it's the way my mind works, but like I often find I have to work backwards from the idea, which is the end result, to figure out the steps I need to take. And sometimes those steps I don't always follow a logical flow. It might be that one of the steps, in the medium term goal is actually really achievable for me this week. So I'll do that one. I don't let things get in my way. If I can't do something on the short term list because, I don't have access to that information for 3 weeks, I'll find something somewhere else that I can action, so that I still have momentum, I guess.
It's like keeping that momentum and keep moving forwards. I love that way of being able to break it down into those, three different ways, really, food and lists. And is there any kind of linking to that and to working towards your goal? I know you're kind of working backwards, but as you work towards that goal on a daily, for your daily habits or routines, for example, is there anything specifically that supports you with staying consistent on, again, taking that daily action?
Yeah. So I find, and I bet lots of people can relate to this, like time is a barrier sometimes. So we'll often say, I just haven't had time to dedicate to this. So I think we need to think carefully about creating pockets of time. So again, it's helpful, I think, like each day I have like my little planner. A lot of my time's taken up in appointments and meetings, but I'll still go through my planner each day, and I have two different lists on there. One is like my day-to-day tasks that are essential to the running of my business. And then usually there's a couple of things on there for that day or that week which relate to actioning ongoing other projects. I like to try and make sure that I'm kind of always working on things, even if that's tiny little steps, that it always gets my time and attention. So I block out time each day to kind of do my planning. And it's only a small chunk of time, like, 15, 20 minutes. When I get home from the school run, I'll kind of just sit and prep for the day. And then also, and I know this isn't possible for everybody, but it's definitely something that I've found helpful, is blocking out a certain chunk of time each week, which is a bigger chunk of time, to try and do a deeper focus on those things that I'm trying to action. So I think planning those things in are important. And I know that, sometimes it's hard to find that time when you're running, a busy business. But if I think how much time I spend scrolling on my phone, for example,
Absolutely. Everyone can find that little bit of time. I say to my clients as well, it's strategically find exactly that time blocking, but finding the time strategically 30 minutes every day to do your lead generation, to do your content and your sales. And that honestly is embedded every single day into so many of my clients' routines. And it's almost as if it's like a no-brainer. Like, you don't even start scrolling until you've done your 30 minutes of lead generation and content. And it's amazing how effective by getting into that habit and routine it is. And it's like any kind of habit, isn't it? When you get into a habit or routine for anything in life, just as simple as taking the kids to school, it's something we have to do. It's a routine. So actually building that little bit of time into your day to do the one thing that's going to support you getting closer to your goal will ultimately help you.
Yeah. And sometimes I think maybe we have a tendency to think, when I've done everything else, I'll focus on that. That's kind of what I do in new projects. I think once I've got on top of all this day-to-day stuff, I'll focus on that project. Like, I'm never on top of it.
Back burner. Yeah. You put it on the back burner. It's like, oh.
yeah. And then, 4-6 weeks later, you think, oh gosh, I haven't done anything about that actually. So I try now to kind of think, right, these are my tasks for the day. If other stuff does come in, that is going to have to wait for the next day, because I need to leave that gap where I can focus on this stuff, because actually the stuff that I'm trying to make time for is often what is most closely linked to my goals, my dreams, my ideas, where I want to be.
Yeah. Amazing. And what advice would you give someone who potentially feels really stuck and just needs to take their first step towards the dream? I know you've already sort of said that with your goals or dreams or projects, you work backwards, and you've given a little bit of a breakdown for what you do as a process. But is there any advice that you could give someone that's maybe listening to this episode, they feel a bit stuck with, one of their big goals or dreams, and that they just don't know what to do? What would you advise them?
Honestly, like, what I would probably say, and it's so basic and maybe it feels reckless, just do something, anything. Like, it doesn't matter if you start at the end or the beginning or in the middle. Like, do something. Close your eyes, poke your finger onto a mind map, and do that one thing. Because I feel like when we get that momentum, that helps carry us forward. Like, it's never going to be perfect, but we don't learn without taking action. We just sit in a stew of overthinking and what ifs and, uncertainty. So by taking an action, any action, no matter how big, small, whatever, that puts us in the position then to learn from the thing we did. Either it works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, we learn something and we do it differently. If it works, amazing, on to the next action. So my advice for people would be just do something, anything.
Amazing. Incredible advice. And thank you so much for diving into the topic of taking action. It's been absolutely incredible. And hopefully for those that are listening, again, do the things that are going to move that needle forwards. Anything, any action every single day. That consistency is key, and really listening to some of the advice that Shelley has given today, which is incredible. Shelley, before we finish the episode, I've got a couple more questions. One that I ask all of my guests on the podcast: what is your word of the year and why?
So my word of the year is authenticity, because I think there's something about kind of really tuning in to why you're doing what you're doing, what it is you want, and that really aligning with who you are, that puts you in the position where you can ignore some of that overthinking, where you can put the imposter syndrome to the side and you can feel bold enough to do the things you want to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just to finish off on today's episode, where can everyone find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so mostly you would find me on Instagram at Fortitude Psychological Therapy, which is my business name. I also have a website which has a lot of kind of free resources and materials and blogs and stuff like that, which is www.fortitudepsychologicaltherapy.co.uk. And I am also on LinkedIn. If people want a more sort of professional version of me, that's where you'll find me. If you want the kind of authentic me, then Instagram is where to look.
Amazing. Shelley, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on today's podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And thank you so much to everyone that's tuned in to today's episode. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, and I will see you all again next time. Thank you for tuning in to the Actually I Can Female Entrepreneur podcast with me, your host, Kayleigh Greenacre. If you are ready to build, grow, and scale your dream six-figure or multi-six-figure business, then head to our website now for more information, or connect with me on socials to see how you can create your dream business and dream life.